Hi, my name's Geoff Luttrell. I own San Francisco Guitar Works and Sonoma County Guitar Works. I have over 20 years of experience in doing fretwork professionally. So I'm excited to share my expertise with you so that you can learn how to diagnose common fret issues and then learn how to level, crown, and polish your frets. Your strings could be buzzing when you play for a variety of reasons. You could have a setup that is done improperly. The guitar could have too much relief in the neck, causing buzzing in the middle registers. The action could just be too low. Your pick attack could be very heavy and causing buzzing at your current action height. Or you could have uneven frets up and down the board, or you could have localized high or low frets, depending on what kind of buzzing you're getting. So now that you've determined that your guitar has some fret issues that you need to address, there are certain ground rules that you'll want to make sure you follow before you get started. The first thing is that you want to make sure that the guitar or other fretted instrument is set up properly. You want to make sure you've gone through your neck relief, your bridge action, make sure that all that's done correctly so you're diagnosing an actual fret issue, not a setup issue. Another thing to remember is that the process is the same no matter what the fretted instrument is, whether it's a bass, a mandolin, a guitar, banjo. You want to make sure that you have it set up correctly, and you'll use the same set of diagnostic processes and the same tools for all the instruments. What's great is that MusicNomad has created the Keep It Simple setup method, so you can quickly go in, set your guitar up correctly, make it play the way you want it to, and then you can assess the instrument for fret buzz after it's properly set up. So do you need to take your guitar neck off to do fret work? If I have my preference, I like to take the neck off if it's a bolt-on instrument, just because that gets the body out of the way and it makes it where there's not any possible issue of damaging the body during the fretwork process. That said, if you have a set neck guitar like this Les Paul or an acoustic, you're going to do your fret work with the neck on the body. So proper precautions and careful tool handling, it's not a problem. So this guitar has been properly set up using the MusicNomad Keep It Simple setup method. And now I'm going to go ahead and assess this for any fret issues, high or low frets, buzzing, and things that you would find with uneven frets. I'm going to want a way to track any high or low frets that I find. And a couple of good ways to do that is one, you can use the MusicNomad Fret Buzz Tracker. You can find that on the website. That's an easy way to record any buzzing that you find on your instrument. And if you don't have access to that, you can just grab a piece of paper and you can write down what fret is buzzing and on what string. So before I get started, in order to track my fret buzz, I'm just going to make a little legend here of my E string, A string, D, G, B, and E. And then underneath each of those, I can just write the number of the fret that's buzzing. So it makes it pretty easy to keep track. All right, so here we go. So the 9th fret on my low E string is definitely buzzing. So I'm going to go ahead and write under my E, I'm going to write 9. And keep going up the fretboard. Getting a little bit of buzz on that 2nd fret on my A string. So I'm going to write a 2 under my A and keep going on that. Well, that 9th fret is very buzzy. It's pretty much choked completely out. So I'll write a 9 under my A string. Keep going. The 2nd fret on my D string, right next to the 2nd fret on my A string, is a little bit buzzy. So I'm going to go ahead and notate that. Little buzzy on that 9th fret D string, just like on the E and the A. Little buzzy on that 14th fret D string as well. A little spanky on the 2nd fret G string. 14th fret on the G string is pretty buzzy. Sometimes it's hard to identify if you're getting fret buzz or just a little spankiness on the string. So, ooh, that's really buzzy. 5th fret on the high E. So when I play the individual notes, what I found is that on my E, A, and D, the 9th fret is buzzy. On the A, D, and G, the 2nd fret is buzzy. The high E is buzzy on the 5th fret, and then the 14th is buzzy on the D and the G. So now that I've done that, I'm going to go in. This guitar gets played in a way where there's a lot of bending. So I'm going to go in and assess my high E and B strings for choking in the high registers for bends. So I'll come in and start about my 12th fret. Okay, so that is on bending. I am completely choking out. So when I bend on the 18th fret, the note is not ringing out. So I'll notate that on the high E, I'm fretting out on the 18th fret. Then I can go over to the B, do the same thing. Kind of the same thing on the 18th fret. It's just starting to choke out on the B string. So now I've assessed the individual notes and any frets that are buzzing whenever I bend. So now I can go through and check each fret with the fret rocker and determine what frets are actually high. So what is fret buzz, you might be wondering? Whenever you play a string, the string is contacting the fret where you're fretting it, and then it is going to the bridge saddle. So it's suspended above the frets past the one that you're fretting. So whenever you have good fretwork and a proper setup, when you pluck the string and it vibrates, it does not hit the frets below it. Whenever you have uneven frets, when you pluck the string and it vibrates, it runs into the frets that are high. So on this guitar, for instance, I have a very buzzy A string at the 9th fret. So you can hear that fret buzz. The reason for that is that when I'm plucking the string, it's hitting the 10th fret because the 10th fret is higher than the rest of the frets. So if you have a guitar that has all the frets in a perfect plane, but one of the frets has been hit or pushed down, when you play on that fret, it's going to buzz because it's lower than all the other frets. So you may have fret buzz on multiple strings just because of this one low fret that's causing the string to buzz on the next fret, which appears higher. So now we have played this guitar and determined that we have fret buzz in a few different areas. I've notated all of the spots where I'm getting buzz. And so now I'm going to want to come in and diagnose what's actually going on with the frets. Now the MusicNomad Fret Evaluation Kit is the perfect thing for that. It has a fret rocker, which I really like. This is a non-traditional shape fret rocker. It's more rectangular than many on the market, which keeps the weight centered between your fingers. It's also a string action gauge, which is great because, when you're doing your fret work, you might want to check your setup during the process. So you've got that tool there as well. It has a couple of different rulers and it's nice and thick. It's really a great tool to use. I'll also be using the MusicNomad Fret Gauge today, which has 3 different feeler gauges. One is to measure the amount of rock that you have for unevenness of frets. The second is to measure fret seating, so you can see if the frets are pressed down to the fretboard properly. The third is to measure kind of a minimum fret height that we recommend for fret leveling. There's also a gauge at the end to help you determine the fret width so that you can know which side of your S file to use when you're crowning the frets when you get to that point. So now I'll refer to my notes and look at where my fret buzzing was, and I'll use my fret rocker to determine if I have high frets in those locations. So the first fret that has a pronounced buzz, or when I play on, is the 2nd fret. So I'm going to come in here and measure my 3rd fret. When you play a note and that note buzzes, the fret that you're playing is not the high fret, it's the next one up. So to check my third fret for being out of level, I'm going to use the side of the fret rocker that lays across 3 frets. Typically, you're only going to want to lay the fret rocker on 3 frets. If you start spanning more than that, it skews your readings. So I'm going to take my side here that lays across 3, and I'm going to see that my third fret is definitely high in the center, kind of mainly centered on the G string, the D string, and a little bit on the A string, which is exactly where I saw my buzz. So now I will take my fret gauge and I'll pull out my 1.5 thousandths feeler gauge, and I'm just going to check to verify that this is indeed out of tolerance. I believe it is because it's buzzing, so that's definitely an indicator, but I'm going to check my tolerance by rocking the gauge one direction on the 3rd fret, and then I'll check on the 4th fret with my fret level gauge, and I can see that my gauge goes between the 4th fret and the bottom of the fret rocker. So that tells me that the amount of rock that I have is beyond 1.5 thousandths. Now you're wondering, I'm sure, why 1.5 thousandths? Well, what we have found is that whenever a guitar has properly leveled frets, you have about 1 thou to 1.5 thou tolerance in the fret level before you start getting buzzing at average string actions. So if you find that you check all your frets and you have one that has a tiny bit of rock, if you can't get your fret gauge through the gap and the guitar does not have buzz at that fret, then you know that your fretwork is within tolerance and you don't need to level a fret that has just the tiniest bit of rock. Now that I've determined that the 3rd fret is high and it is out of tolerance, I'm going to go ahead and check to make sure that the fret is seated. So when frets are pressed into the fretboard, ideally the fret crown will contact the fingerboard all the way across and have no gap. Sometimes whenever guitars they get older or they have been improperly fretted, the fret can pop up either in the middle or on the ends, and you'll have a gap between the fret crown and the fretboard. So using our fret gauge, we're going to take the 4 thousandths inch thick feeler gauge, and I'm going to come in here and just move the strings out of the way, and I'm just going to take my gauge and push it up against the edge of the fret and see if it goes underneath the fret crown. And it is not going under the crown. So I know that this fret is seated, it's just high in the middle. So as you're making your notes about what frets are high, your initial notes just showed you what fret was buzzing as it was being played, but that's not the actual high fret. So you might want to go back in and notate that your 2nd fret buzz was actually the 3rd fret being high. So you can just cross out your 2s and you can write in 3s because the 3rd fret is the one that you're actually going to level. So it would be very easy to get confused and go in and start working on your 2nd fret whenever that's not actually the fret that's high. So now that we've measured the 3rd fret high and it's seated correctly and it's out of tolerance, I'm going to go ahead and move on up to my 9th fret. So similarly, I can assume that because I'm buzzing on my 9th fret, my 10th fret is the one that's high because it's the next one up closest to the bridge. So now I'm going to use the shorter edge of my fret rocker, and I'm going to span the 9th, 10th, and 11th frets. So I'm definitely rocking on that 10th fret, very high between the E and the A, and it decreases to the D, and it pretty much drops off to nothing around the G string. So I notated on my sheet that I have buzz on E, A, and D, and that really corresponds to what I'm seeing with the rocker. So just like we did on our 3rd fret, first I'm going to grab my fret level gauge, and I'm going to measure my gap. I'm going to rock back. The fret rocker rocks on the 10th fret. I'm going to rock it back to the 9th fret. And then at the 11th fret, I'm going to see if my fret level gauge goes between the 10th fret and the 11th fret and the fret rocker, and it does. Same thing on the A string, definitely goes through. D string, it's getting a little tighter, and it barely goes, but it definitely does go. But as I get over to the G, it does not go in anymore. So I know that I'm definitely out of tolerance on my E, A, and D strings. Lastly, I will take my fret seating gauge. I'm going to measure at the 10th fret and see if it goes under the fret at all. and it does not. So the fret is seated, it's just not level. So now that I found that my 9th fret is buzzing and my 10th fret is high, I want to determine, is that truly because the 10th fret is high, or is the 9th fret low? So if you have your frets all in plane, you could have your 9th fret lower than all the rest. So what I want to do is I want to slide my fret rocker back, and I want to check the 7th, 8th, and 9th frets for level. So I have my 7th, 8th, and 9th frets for level, and I'm getting no rock there. So that tells me that my 7th, 8th, and 9th are level, and that my 10th is truly high. If the 9th was low, I would be rocking on the 8th fret as well as the 10th fret, showing that the 9th fret is out of plane with the others. So now I'll move up to my 14th fret, and I'm going to measure my 15th fret to see if it's high. So I'll grab the proper size side of my fret rocker, and I'll span the 3 frets at the 15th fret. So I'm getting no rocking on the E string, just a tiny bit on the A. It's definitely starting to rock more on the D. It's rocking a fair amount on the G, very slightly on the B, and none on the E. So I'll grab my fret level gauge, and I'm going to check to see where I have out of tolerance. So it's my 15th fret is high. I'm going to write 15, 15, go back here and do my 9th fret. It's actually the 10th. So before I move on, I'm going to go ahead and check my seating with my fret seating gauge at the 15th fret in the middle. And it does not go under. It's very, very well seated. So the last thing I'll check is my 18th fret that was fretting out when I was bending. What I'm going to be looking for is a high fret in the area where the string was when it fretted out. So as I bent the string up and it fretted out in the middle of the neck, that means I have a high fret somewhere in the middle of the neck. It's not out on the E string itself. So that's pretty easy to check because we have our 18th fret here, which was fretting out when I was bending. I have no high 19th fret at the E string. It's fine on the B. And then it starts rocking as I get over to the G and the D. It's very high. So it's this, the 19th fret is actually high in the middle of the fret, even though it was fretting out when I was bending the E string. So I'm going to go ahead and check my fret level in the middle there on the 19th fret. Yeah, it's definitely clears on the D string, clears on the G, but does not on the B, and it does not on the A, just almost. So we have a high fret in the middle on our 19th fret. So we'll go ahead and notate that. So 19th, and it's basically at the D and the G string. Check my fret seating. And once again, the fret is well seated. It's just not level. So now that we've determined that we're going to level the frets on this guitar, we want to make sure that we have enough fret height to level. You can level frets all the way down to the board. It makes them very hard to crown, and it doesn't make the guitar play very well. If you have frets that are too low, it's really hard to get under the string to bend. The string just rolls out from under your finger, and also the crown, any type of crowning file is going to have a really hard time rounding them over. The lowest height that we would recommend crowning to is 24/1000 of an inch, which is a fairly low fret, but you can get there and it will play. So the first thing that we're going to do before the leveling process is measure to see if we have enough fret height to actually crown. So what I'll do is I'll take my fret rocker and place it across the frets, and then I will use my fret height gauge that's in the fret gauge kit to put between my fingerboard and the fret rocker. Now I'm not putting it between the fret and the rocker, it's between the board and the rocker because I'm measuring the height. And this has a lot of gap between the fret height gauge and the fret rocker. So I know I've got well beyond 24/1000 of an inch of fret. So there's not going to be any trouble leveling these frets and having a good height fret when we're all finished. So now that we've diagnosed the fret issues on this Epiphone, we're going to move into the leveling process. I'm going to show you how to do a full fret level on this guitar. Before you start any job like this, you want to select the right tools. So whether you have 1 or 2 high frets or you have a full fret level that needs to be done, the MusicNomad fret pair tools have got you covered. If you have 1 or 2 high frets, you might choose the U files to level those. These are really good for spot leveling. You can use them under the strings, and you can identify 1 fret, level that down, then crown it and polish it, and that should take care of any buzzing issues you have with 1 high fret. If you have a guitar with multiple high frets, 4 or more, or you have other reasons that you want to do an entire fret level, you would be looking at using the L-beams. These come in 3 different lengths. This is a 7-inch beam. This would be used for spot leveling, say on the extension if you have a kick at the end of the fretboard. So the 17-inch beam would be used for an electric or acoustic guitar. It covers all the frets and enables you to get a really great, perfectly leveled fret surface. They also come in a 24-inch length if you have a bass. So the first step in doing a full fret level is taking the strings off the guitar and setting your neck as flat as you can make it. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to loosen the strings and get them out of the way so that I can assess the neck for straightness. So as you're doing your initial neck adjustments, you need the strings out of the way. The cradle cube has a feature you can tuck them out of the way and get them off the fretboard. If you have a Tune-O-Matic equipped guitar, you can usually loosen the strings enough that you can just pop the stop tail piece completely off, and then you can lay that to the side, and with the string still on, that makes it a little easier. The strings are just completely out of the way. So now that I have my strings off, I'm going to gain access to my truss rod nut. This one happens to have 3 little Phillips screws. Most, if it's a Gibson, it's going to have 2. Fender, professional, Fender American, it's not going to have a truss rod cover. It's just going to have the hole for the truss rod wrench. So just act accordingly. Once I have that off and out of the way, I'm going to set my neck perfectly flat. So in order to assess my neck and get it as flat as possible, I'm going to use the MusicNomad Tri-Beam. So this is a notch straight edge, so you can check your fretboard level, and then it also has a regular straight edge, so you can check the fret tops. I'm going to do my initial adjustment using the notch straight edge to get my fretboard set perfectly flat. Now I am seeing that I'm hitting at the very end. I've got a little bit of a gap from the 11th fret up to the end. I'm touching in the middle and I'm touching at the end. So this is about as flat as this is going to get. It just has some imperfections in it. Whenever you set your neck flat, you can't really expect that it's going to be perfect. These guitars have variances from the factory, the wood moves, you're going to have little gaps here and there. What you're really trying to do is get it as flat as you can. So you can typically expect 3 points of contact. So like I have, it's contacting in the first position, middle of the neck, and at the end. Now, what I also like to do after I get the fretboard as flat as possible, I want to check the fret tops using the straight edge. Because if the frets are wildly out of level, you may find that it's better to level the neck using the fret tops so that you minimize the amount of fret removal. So I'm going to check the fret tops and just make sure that I'm kind of in the same plane as my fretboard. And I'm not getting any rock, so I know I don't have any back bow. The straight edge is not rocking in the middle. And I can see, I can definitely see some gaps. It is rocking on that 10th fret on the low E, but I knew that fret was high, so I'm not really surprised. But I'm getting the same thing. I can see it touching the first fret, touching in the middle of the neck, and hitting at the end. So this neck is pretty flat. I'm getting a little rock here and there, but it's on all of the frets that I'd already identified as high. So with the strings off, this guitar's neck happens to be perfectly flat, exactly the way I want it to be to level the frets. Now, if the neck would have gone into a back bow with the strings off, I would have needed to loosen the truss rod to decrease that back bow and bring the neck to flat. if the neck still stayed with relief in it, I would have needed to tighten the truss rod in order to bring it back to flat. Chances are, if you've done your keep it simple setup method, you've got 0.6 of an inch of relief in the neck. When you take the strings off, it is going to go either to dead flat or just a little bit of back bow. So you might have to back off the truss rod a little bit. There's very little chance it's going to have any relief in it with the strings off. But if it does, just give the truss rod a little tighten and you'll be in good shape. Now I have the neck set flat. So the next step is going to be to level the frets. There are a couple things I need to do to get the guitar ready for that. If you have a guitar that the nut is easily removed, I would go ahead and take the nut out. That enables you to move the beam with longer strokes. If you have a nut that is either finished over or it's heavily glued in, or if there's some reason that you don't feel comfortable removing the nut, you can leave it in. You're going to only be able to move the beam with smaller strokes. It's fine, it just takes a little bit longer. But this guitar, I'm going to go ahead and knock this nut out with a piece of wood and a hammer. So this nut has no finish over it. It's not set down in a pocket. It should just be glued right to the edge of the fretboard. So I'm just going to give it a light rap with a hammer and it should just pop right out. And it did. Easy. A little bit of wood came off where the glue was, but that's no big deal. So now that the nut is removed and I can level the frets with the beam, I need to support the neck so that it isn't flexing whenever I am leveling the frets. There's a lot of different ways you can do this. If you have a wooden caul with cork in it that's specially made for this purpose, you can use that. If you have a bean bag, what I'm going to use today is just a towel rolled up to support the entire neck, which is completely adequate for the purposes of the fret level. Okay, so now I have the guitar set where when I put pressure on it, the headstock is not hitting the bench, and it's good and supported all the way up the length to the body. There's plenty of stiffness in the body to keep this from deflecting. So now I want to just look around and see, is there anything that's going to be in the way of the beam? So on a Les Paul, typically, and this guitar is no exception, your pickup ring is really close to the fretboard top. So as you're leveling, your beam is going to be coming out above your pickup. And so you want to make sure that the beam is not going to contact the pickup adjustment screws or hit the pickup ring. You can do that by taking your straight edge and extending it over the pickup. This is going to be pretty close on those pickup height screws. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to remove the pick guard and this pickup, and I can lay the pickup off to the side. You don't typically have to desolder it or do anything fancy. You can just remove the 4 pickup ring screws, and there's typically enough wire to be able to just lay the pickup over. You can put a cloth on your guitar or something to keep it from scratching. But let's pull the screws out and see what we find. So you can use the screwdriver if you have a truss rod adjustment kit. You can just use the screwdriver that comes in that, or just any Phillips. But you don't want to hope for the best on this. If you think that it's going to hit anything, you just need to get it out of the way, because you certainly don't want to damage your guitar. This process is easy to do without damaging your guitar, but you do just have to be aware of a couple of things. So we'll get this pulled out. If the ring is lower, you can just lower down the pickup and not worry about it, but this is all just very close to the top of the fret plane. So there's our pickup ring screws. I'm going to get this pick guard taken off just because it's pretty close to the fretboard as well. So off comes our pick guard, and then sure enough, we can lay this pickup off to the side. I'm going to go ahead and grab a microfiber cloth to lay on the guitar to make sure that nothing gets scratched. So I'm going to lay a cloth here, just flip this over to the side. Now that's out of the way, and I have clear access to the fret tops, and I can do my level now. So the beam that I'm going to use is the 17-inch MusicNomad L beam. This is long enough to span all of the frets. and it will make them all perfectly level with one another. The downside of using a smaller beam for a full fret level is that they have a tendency to kind of ride the imperfections. So if you have a neck that has a back bow and then a kick at the end of the fretboard, if you use a short beam, it can follow that contour and it can keep you from getting a perfectly level fret plane. So using a beam that spans all of the frets, you are sure that all the fret tops are perfectly level with one another. There are a few things that are really cool about the MusicNomad L beam. It's really ergonomic. It has a nice hourglass shape, so it's really easy to grip. The ends are beveled so that you don't bang into and ding frets that are high as you're starting the leveling process. And it comes with 3M Stick-It Gold paper that is in 240 grit and 400 grit. So I'm going to use the 240 first to do my initial level. It's a good grit for fairly fast fret material removal, but it's not overly aggressive, so it's going to leave you with a pretty good finish. And once we get it down to level with the 240, we're going to flip it over, use the 400 for the final last little bit of level. So in the leveling process, the end goal that you're looking for is for every fret to have been touched by the beam. So that ensures that all the fret tops are on the same plane. Now, when I am leveling, I don't use any marker or any indicator on the tops of the frets. I find that I can just see the scoring marks on the top, and it's really not an issue for me to know when I'm finished. But if you're newer at doing this and you want to be sure that you have a good visual, you can take a marker and you can mark the tops of the frets, and then you'll know that you've hit all the frets because you can see that the marker's gone. So I'm going to go ahead and just mark my fret tops with black marker. If you have a maple fretboard, you certainly want to be sure that you don't drag the Sharpie off onto your fretboard because you will leave a mark on it. Rosewood, ebony are a little more forgiving because you can just steel wool it out. But if you have a finished board, you really want to try to avoid getting Sharpie on the board. This whole process is definitely achievable, step by step, but you want to be careful and you want to pay attention as you're going. So with my 240 side down, I'm going to put that directly on the frets, and I'm going to, I like to hold the headstock just to keep the guitar from moving, but I'm just going to gently move the beam back and forth on the tops of the frets. And I'm just right in the center of the fretboard right now. But what I'm going to do is as I'm leveling, I'm going to fan the board out to the side, and I'm going to cross all the way across the frets so that I get all the frets from edge to edge. Now, a couple things that you want to remember as you're doing this. You don't want to hang the beam off the side at an angle because you will break the corner where the crown meets the bevel, and you can really wash out the ends of your frets, and that will cause them not only to be unlevel, but to make it where your string will fall off the fret more easily. So you want to make sure that you just keep it's almost level as it goes across, but you do have to follow the curvature of the fretboard as you are leveling, but you don't want to get way off to one side or the other. So as I'm doing this, I can already see, just from those few strokes, I can already see the frets that I had marked as high. My 3rd fret I'm hitting, my 14th fret I'm hitting, and my my 19th fret I'm hitting. So that's already happening. So now as I come in, I'm going to just move this back and forth across. I'm coming out to the high E side, coming back over. Now I can feel it rocking on my 10th fret. So as I'm leveling this, I'm noticing that on the low E side, the beam is actually rocking on my 10th fret. And I don't want that to happen, because what will happen is the beam will kind of ride on the 1st and 10th fret, and then it'll go on the 10th and the last fret, and it can make a back bow in the neck. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my 10th fret down with the U file. I'm just going to do a quick preliminary level on that to get that down and out of the way. So I'll take my U file, I'm just going to level that down. And even if you don't go all the way, that's fine, but you definitely want to have it where you don't have any noticeable rock with the beam. Still have just a tiny bit. There's probably a couple of other little fret imperfections here. That's the thing. Once you get, 4 or more frets, there probably are other things going on. So, finding other imperfections is pretty much standard fare. So now I'll get in here and move over to the low side. I'm just going to come across, keep going back and forth. So as you can see, I'm trying to keep the beam in line with the string path. I'm not keeping it parallel to the center line. I'm kind of angling it one direction on the high E and the other direction on the low E. So you're going to have a little bit shorter travel across at the first fret and a little bit more travel at the last fret. If you have a hard time doing that at first, don't sweat it. You'll get it with practice. But you want to try to follow the string line. And I can stop and check and see what I've got. So I have just a little bit left that I haven't quite hit. I've got some black marker here on my 13th fret, got a little bit on my 9th over here, but I can definitely see I'm taking a lot of material off of the areas where I measured that there were high frets. So I'm just going to keep going until I reach those final few low spots. Now, one thing I'd like to mention is I have on my 9th fret, I have a spot right around the B string that's a little bit low. I wouldn't want to just stay on that B and just hog and hog and hog right in that area. You can stay kind of in that general area, but you do need to work the beam back and forth and not just make one flat spot on the fret top. That will just cause problems when you're leveling the fret. And you want to try to preserve your radius as much as you can by fanning the beam across, even if you are trying to get out just one low area. Okay, now I'm starting to get down to that low spot on that 9th fret. I just took the marker off. And now I've got just a tiny bit out here on my low E string. So I'm just going to kind of come over to the low E, go back up to the middle, come over to the low E, back up to the middle. I'm just trying to preserve that fret radius and not spend too much time in one area. Okay, so now I have hit all the frets. I've taken off all of the marker. So now that I've got everything level with the 240, I'm going to go ahead and hit the fret tops lightly with the 400 just to take out some of the sanding marks. So whenever you are crowning your fret tops, you will have less work to do when it comes to the final polishing process. I'll take my 400. Give it a few swipes across. That looks really good. I've hit all my fret tops. You can definitely, when you do this on your guitar, you're going to notice that there are some areas of the frets are going to have wider flat spots. Some are going to be narrower. The wider spots are areas where the frets were high. And so you've taken them down farther into the fret crown, so it's wider. The areas that are narrow were the lowest spots, and so you barely hit those, so you still have a pretty fresh fret crown. Now's the time to clean your fretboard. A vacuum is really the best thing. I have a shop vac, so I'm just going to quickly vacuum off the fretboard. So now that I've got the frets leveled and I've cleaned up all my metal dust, I'm going to check my fret level with my long beam. And just, remember, this may all look very complicated, but, if you just take it slow and are careful, you can totally do this. The tools make it really easy. You've got gauges to check your progress, and, you're not going to make one move and all of a sudden your guitar's messed up. If you're slow and steady, you'll do fine. So now I'm going to check my fret tops for anything that's out of level. If I'm looking for any space between the beam and the fret tops, and I had a lot of space in a lot of different areas beforehand, and now I am looking really good. I'm not identifying any gaps between any of the frets and the beam. You just want to look, you just want to go fret to fret and just look and see if there's any space. If you think there is, an easy way to find out is grab your fret level feeler gauge, and you can just set your beam down and try to put it through, and it isn't going to go because you've got a good fret level here. So that is the leveling part of the process. Not too bad. It doesn't take very long. So now we have we're confident we have a good level fret plane, and now I'm going to take you into the next step, which is the crowning of the frets. So the leveling process completed has achieved a perfectly level fret plane. So if you remember when I played this guitar, it had buzzes, localized buzzing. We had some high and low frets. And after doing the leveling, I can see that there were other fret leveling issues that I didn't even pick up because I see a differential in the width of the line that's left after the leveling. So now we have a perfectly true fret plane, which is going to allow us to have a nice low action, and we're going to have a good clean playability all up and down the neck because we've removed any of the high and low spots. So at this point, I consider the level finished, and I'm going to move on to crowning and polishing. But if it's your first time, you're a little unsure of your work, if you want to, you could string the guitar back up and play it and make sure that it does play cleanly for you. The one thing to note is that because your fret tops are flat, you might have some overtones or some sitaring type of sounds because the frets are not crowned correctly. So being able to differentiate between actual fret buzz and noises made because the frets are not crowned correctly may or may not be something that you can do. But, if you want to just make sure they're level, it plays pretty clean, you can string it up and check it now before you do the crowning. I don't typically find it necessary, but it is an option. So now that we've leveled the frets, I want to move into crowning the frets. So what is crowning frets, you might ask? Crowning a fret is making it round on the top again. Whenever you level the frets, you have made the tops of the frets flat. So you want to make them rounded again so that the note that you're playing on the fret is clean. What will happen is if you have fret tops that are flat, either from leveling and not recrowning, maybe from bending, a lot of bending, it shaves the tops of the frets off and makes them flat. You will have overtones, you'll have sustain issues, sometimes you just have weird noises because the string is vibrating on the fret top. So by crowning the fret back to a nice perfect arch, you have a very clean takeoff point for the string so that there's no interference with the string's vibration. So for crowning the fret tops, I'm going to use the MusicNomad S file. This looks like a very simple little device, but this is a lot of work went into designing this. I've done a lot of fret crowning. I've used every type of file imaginable, diamond coated, not diamond coated, all the types. There are many challenges with using your normal fret crowning file. The biggest problem is overfiling and not knowing when to stop. I've trained a lot of techs on how to crown frets, and the biggest challenge is not over beveling the fret ends. It's very easy to come down at an angle and wash out those fret ends, like cut them down too low, and you can completely ruin your fret level by overfiling. So that is one of the things that we wanted to try to minimize or eliminate with the S file. Another issue with other files, whether it's a triangle file, three-corner file, or some other files that file at an angle, is it's hard to keep a consistent fret profile across the fret. If you're using a triangle file, you're kind of bringing the fret crown up to a point in the center. Maybe you're taking the same amount of material off all the way across, maybe you're not. It's very hard to tell. There are some other files on the market that file to a point on the top of the fret, which initially is fine, but you have a very fine amount of metal that's supporting the string, and so the wear tends to be a little bit greater with a pointed fret profile. So a proper round profile, just like the frets came with from the factory, is the ideal. So with the S file, we have developed this so that it has the proper radius for exactly correct fret crowning. It has a safety strip in the middle that will stop the fret file from removing more material once it hits the top of the fret. So it makes it very difficult to do any overfiling because immediately the file starts skating on the top of the fret once you've hit the fret top. As opposed to files without that, you can just keep filing and filing and filing until you take the fret down to the fretboard. This is also, it's very ergonomic. It has a rubber cover that makes it really easy on your hand, and it's short on the backside, so you can file over a guitar without worrying about dinging the top of the guitar. Crowning on a Les Paul or an acoustic, you definitely have to be careful because you've got a lot of guitar top right around the extension, but I'll show you how to do that carefully. So the first step before we get to the crowning is to determine our fret width. So to do that, I'm going to use the fret width gauge on my fret gauge set. And I'll take this and I'm going to put this little notch right on the end of the handle. It says place over fret. And so I'm going to put this over the fret and I'm going to look and see, is it hitting the fretboard or is there a gap? And there is definitely a gap between the gauge and the fretboard. And what that means is that I have a wide fret. So it says right on the handle, if the gauge rests on fretboard, no, I have a wide fret. If it does, I have a narrow to medium. So now that I know that I have wide frets, I'm going to use the wide side of my S file to crown these frets. So, you got 22 frets here. Where do you start? What's the best thing? I just start at the first fret and just start crowning. So if you haven't used a crowning file before, the way that you use it is that you put the channel in the file over the fret. So you're going to rest that channel on top of the fret. And then you're just going to move the file back and forth across the fret. And what I'm doing is I'm raising and lowering my hand to follow the arc of the fret. So what I'll typically do is I'll file with my hand kind of up a little bit. Then I'll start dropping my hand down till I'm filing on the other side. Now, the S file has a safe zone, so you don't have to worry tremendously about where you're filing. But if you're just starting out with this, you might want to look at your fret top so you can see where the filing is happening, so you will have some idea of, are you filing the ends too much? Are you staying in the middle too long? Just so you get a feel of the file and kind of the arc that your hand needs to make to file the fret effectively. So if this is your first time crowning frets and you want to put a black marker on top so you have a little bit better visual, you can do that. But the beauty of the S file is that you don't have to do that because it's going to stop whenever it's done filing. So I'm going to come in here on the fret and I'm going to put the channel right on the fret top. I'm going to start going back and forth across the fret. I stop every little bit just to clear out any dust. And I can just see by the line on top of the fret, I'm getting really close to being done on this fret. So as you can see, this does take a little bit of work to do, but it should take you a minute or two per fret, maybe a little longer. So I would budget between 20 minutes to 45 minutes to crown all your frets. It is hand labor, so it's going to take you some time, but you'll come out of it with a good playing guitar. So now I can already feel that this file is skating on the fret top, so I know that I'm starting to hit the safe zone. So I'm almost done here. So now I'm going to just gently go across right there. There's no cutting. So now I'm going to come across the fret. I'm cutting a little bit on the high side. Now I can feel it starting to skate. So I'm just gently coming back and forth across the fret. There it's skating. So I'm skating all the way across on the safe zone, and I have almost a perfect tiny line across the fret top that shows that I did not file below my level. So that is the ace thing about this file, is it is going to keep you from messing up your fret level by filing too far. Every 4 frets, you might want to give your file a little clean with a stiff bristled brush. If you have a rasp brush or a file brush that's brass, that works pretty well. But you know, if you feel like it's loading up or anything, just clean it. That happens with any filing tool. Now, another cool thing about the S file that I'm not having to use for this is that with the curved end, you can spot level. If you have just one area that you've leveled, you can go ahead and go in with that little point, and you can just level a very definite spot. And there's two lines showing where the apex of the curve is, so you can really localize in and file out any small spots that need to be crowned. And whenever the safe zone hits the top of the fret, just be aware that it's not going to be silent. It's going to definitely, you'll feel the file stop cutting. And when you look at the top, you're going to have a line, but it may be, may not be shiny because some of the fret dust can get up on there and kind of, scratch that up. So, if you're expecting there to be just this crisp, shiny line, it might be a little bit obscure just by some scratches from the fret material, but you'll definitely feel that the file is not cutting anymore. And whenever you do the fret polishing, you're going to take out any imperfections in the fret top anyway. So just, you're really going by feel with the S file. Whenever you feel it skating on the top, you're done. And also the frets that were high are going to require a little bit more crowning because they're going to have a larger flat spot. So I'm at my 10th fret now, which was the one that was high, and so this one's going to take me a little longer than the 9th fret, just because there's more material to remove to make it round again. One thing that I didn't mention is that whenever you're setting yourself up to actually use these tools, you want to think about body position and ergonomics, how your arm is going to move. If you're trying to file a fret with your hand in front of you, it's going to be very hard to keep a straight file stroke. I like to stand off to the side so that my arm can go straight forward and backward in a line. So, if you feel like you're struggling, if you feel like, just doesn't feel right, just think about how you're positioning yourself for the work and just make sure that you're in a position that isn't contorted or doesn't feel constricted, so you have good freedom of movement, and then you'll be able to use the tools more efficiently. So So here, this is the last fret I'm going to be able to do that's not over the body. So all right, so now I've done all of the frets up to the body joint. So now I have to be careful. So there are a couple of ways that you can file the frets that are at the body. You can angle the file down and just use very short strokes on the body side. And then as you come up to do the treble side, then you can do full strokes with your hand. But whenever you get over to this side, you just have to be shorter in order to not hit the body. Another way that you can do it is you can just flip the guitar around and you can come in from this side, but then you have to be sure that you don't overshoot and hit the body. A good safety measure is to put a couple of layers of painter's tape on here so that it won't stop you from dinging the body, but if you accidentally get a little scuff, it will protect it. You could also use part of a string pack or something just to keep it, keep that part safe. I'm just going to do it the way that I always do it, which is just from this side, and I'll just use the back end of the file on this side. That's one of the good parts of the ergonomic handle that's offset, is that I still have a good grip on the file, but I'm able to work with the back edge of the cutting portion so that I can have a lot of good options for how I want to hold it to get over these, any guitar that has body that's in the way of the frets. Okay, so now my next challenge is now the switch is in the way. So on every guitar, you're going to have different challenges. The easiest is going to be a Strat or a Tele, Jazzmaster or something like that you can just pop the neck off, put the body aside, and just do all the work with just the neck. That's your easiest scenario. Les Paul, you had pickup in the way, pick guards a little in the way, now the switch is in the way. So rather than drop the switch, I'm just going to flip the guitar around and do these last 4 frets from the other side. Now I still have to be careful about the horn. I can't come down and hit that. I still have to be careful of the body. But now I should be able to do all this without having to remove the switch. If for some reason you couldn't do that, you just take off this knurled nut, and the switch usually will drop down in the body and get out of the way. You can take off the tip as well. So when you're filing over the body, you're going to notice that you're going to have some fret dust that will land on the finish. Do not use a cloth to try to wipe that off. You can scratch your guitar's finish. The best tool for that is the MusicNomad 1 tool with the very fine brush on the end. You can just brush that right off and it's not going to hurt anything. So just as you're going, you could wait till the end. You're just going to have a little bit of dust here. You can just wipe that right off. So this is an example of being able to use the curved end. I'm able to lift the file up so I don't have to go all the way off and hit the switch. I'm able to lift that up and use that little curved portion. I can lift it up to get the bass side, and then I can drop the back of the file down and use the back half of the file for the treble side. Now I'm going to go ahead and take the switch tip off, just because I don't think I'm going to hit the switch, but if I do, I certainly don't want to put a little ding on that switch tip. So as I'm filing this, I'm constantly watching the back end of the file and the nose of the file, just making sure that I'm not going to hit anything. All right, last but not least. So there we go. All the frets are crowned, and now we're ready to move into the polishing process. At this point you can go back and you can look and just make sure that you didn't, miss a little spot. Sometimes it's easy to leave a little spot at the end. The file skated and you thought, oh, I'm completely done, but maybe there's just a little spot that you didn't quite catch. So you're going to want to go back and just make sure that there isn't anything wider than just a little bit of a line. Like on my 11th fret here, I have just a tiny bit out there at the end that could use just a couple more strokes. There we go. Almost nothing, but So yep, just looking, everything looks good. A little line across the top. And again, if you have fret dust in the file, it may make that line not quite as clear, but as long as you felt your skating and you don't see any flat spots, you're good to go. So now we've leveled the frets and we've crowned the frets. So this guitar has all of its fret imperfections taken out through the leveling process. The crowning process has put a nice round crown back on the fret. The next step in the fret leveling process is to polish the frets, and we're going to polish those out to a mirror shine. So the first thing that we'll do to prepare for that is we'll protect the fretboard, and for that I'm going to use the new MusicNomad Fret Guard. This is a stainless shield that goes on directly on the fretboard and exposes all the frets but protects the wood itself. Now, the reason for using this is that whenever you're polishing the frets, you might need to get down on the sides and you might accidentally rub the fretboard with the fret polisher, and that can mar the fretboard. It's much more critical on finished glossy maple fretboards or like a Rickenbacker that has a finished fretboard. If you have a rosewood board or an ebony board, not quite as critical because the bare wood is a little bit more forgiving, but protecting the wood is a good move. If you don't have the fret guard, which I think is well worth purchasing, it just makes it so much easier, you can use masking tape, like a low-tack masking tape, and tape in between each fret. But just be aware that some finished boards, particularly 90s era, 80s and 90s era Fenders, they have adhesion issues on some of them. You should be able to see it. Often they're flaking on the edges, but if you put tape directly on that finish, you might, when you pull off the tape, you might pull pieces of finish up with it. So just be super cautious and either de-tack your tape on your shirt or your pants, or get really low tack tape, or just get the fret guard. So now I have the fret shield on and I'm ready to polish the frets. And I don't want to overstate this, but it is a critical part of the process to polish your frets out correctly and to as close to mirror shine as you can get, which should be very easy to do with our polishing system. But that does a couple of things. One is it will enable really nice and smooth bending. When your frets are mirror polished, the bending is very, very smooth. And also having them completely polished out will enable you to identify any wear points as you move forward, because it'll be really obvious. If you start getting some little divots or whatever on the frets, or you get a little ding, you'll be able to see it because your frets aren't all scratched up or gunky. So it's just a really nice finish to have on the frets. And also just when you finish, you just look at them and think, wow, those look amazing. So that's really satisfying. So to do the fret polishing, I'm going to use the MusicNomad Tracer Fret Eraser system. This is really a cool tool. It's a very well thought out, uses micro mesh loops on a handle that is spring loaded. So it's really ergonomically designed. It has a radiused edge that is tapered to almost a point, so you can get really close down onto the fret sides without hitting the fretboard. It's double-sided, so you can utilize both sides of the micro mesh without having to rotate it. But whenever you do, this is the cool part of it, once you have polished out 2 or 4 frets, however much you get out of each strip of micro mesh, you just loosen the handle and you can rotate the micro mesh around and keep exposing a fresh part of the micro mesh cloth. And we include 4 grits of micro mesh that are the grits that we would commonly use to take frets from a filed state all the way up to a mirror polish. So they're numbered 1 through 4, super easy. Just do number 1 all the way up, number 2, 3, 4, and you're good to go. So I'm going to get started on that at the first fret. So now that you've crowned your frets, this is going to be a breeze. It's exactly the same motion, exactly the same technique. You're just going to put the channel of the tracer right on the fret top, And then you're just going to go back and forth with this until you've polished out those crowning marks. So I'm going to do exactly the same thing as I did when I was crowning. I'm going to go back and forth across the fret until I've taken out my S-file cutting marks. Just like that. And even with the number 1 grit, that fret's already looking pretty good. So now I'll flip it around, and I can use the back half of the same piece of micro mesh for my 2nd fret. Looks good. Now I can just flip it over to the fresh strip on the other side. So one thing about using the micro mesh for polishing is you do not have to use a lot of pressure. If you use a lot of pressure on the micro mesh, the fabric, the abrasive can come off, but that just shows that you're just pushing too hard. You don't need pressure for it to work. You just keep a light touch on it, move it back and forth, and it's going to hold up and be really durable. But if you push really, really hard, it gets hot, and that's kind of a problem for the abrasive. And this process is going to be about like crowning. It's probably going to take 20 minutes or so to get all of the frets polished all the way out. So not a terribly long and laborious process, but it is going to take a little bit of time. So a little bit on the side there that I missed on my last fret, but it's not a problem to get in there and catch that. Now I've gotten through the first grit, and so now I'm going to pop this off of my handle and go in with number 2. But it's amazing, actually, just going to the 2nd grit, how much shinier these frets are. It's pretty remarkable just from that first polish to the 2nd. Most folks would be satisfied with the polish off number 2, but not us. We're going to number 4. Yeah, it's one of the advantages of using the fret shield is that you can really lay into the corner of those frets without worrying at all about the fretboard. With tape, you're going to burn through the tape, and certainly if you don't do anything to protect the board, then you're just going to scuff it. But yeah, with the fret shield, you can pretty much go at it as much as you want, and it's not going to damage the guitar at all. So I'm really able to get right down in that corner with the tracer because of the shield. And that fret's looking really good all the way down. Flip this thing around just to get access to those upper frets a little better. Switches a little bit in the way, just like it was in the crowning. I can move my micro mesh down to the end so I can get right off the edge of the fret there. Okay, on to number 3. I'm just going to leave the guitar in this orientation. No need to turn it back around. Oh yeah, that's really starting to pop now. And the progressive grits go faster. The first one takes the longest, And once you get up in the higher grits, the final polishes really just don't take very long. So don't get discouraged on that grit number 1. You'll make it. All right, number 4, last step. It's already looking really beautiful, but this will put that little final polish. Now the frets are polished out, looking beautiful. I can go ahead and take off my fret shield. Get your brush off any fret stuff that's still on there. Have a good look at what we've done. Gleaming and glorious. So now that we've done our fret level, crown, and polish, I will be able to go ahead and put the guitar back together, put the pickup back in, put the pick guard on, glue the nut back in, and string it up to pitch. I'll double check my setup, make sure I'm back where I want my action, and then I'll check the playability and make sure that I don't have any buzzing anywhere. So now I have the guitar strung back up to pitch, and since I had to set my neck perfectly flat for my fret level, I'm going to need to recheck my neck relief now that my strings are back on. So I'm going to go ahead and, just like in the Keep It Simple setup, I'm going to go ahead and put in my pick capo to hold my first fret, my low E string down at the first fret. I'm going to put the guitar in the playing position. I'm going to fret between the 12th and 13th, and I'm going to use my truss rod gauge to set the relief to 0.6 of an inch. So I'm going to fret here, and I'm going to see at my 6th fret. Yeah, it's just a little bit tight. So I'm going to go ahead and loosen that truss rod just a bit. I believe this is a 4mm Allen on this one. Yeah, that's right. Almost there. And sometimes you have to pull your strings out of the way in order to get enough access to turn the truss rod wrench as much as you want. So. All right, that just barely skates. So. Right at 0.6 of an inch. Double check my action. Should be the same where it was. That's right at 60 and 50. So now I can play the guitar again and see where we are with our playability. So, I mean, it plays perfectly cleanly so far. And I didn't change the action height or anything. This is exactly how it was when I first tested it, and I'm sure you all remember how buzzy it was then. Perfectly clean. Now I'm going to go back in, I'm going to do my bends. Perfectly clean bending. So that fixed everything that was wrong. So, this is a very good example of how critical proper fretwork is to the overall playability of your guitar. I mean, this guitar played like garbage before the fret level. It had buzzes, multiple locations. You couldn't bend. It was fretting out. And after doing the level, the crown, and polish, now the guitar plays very clean at the same action height. The frets look really great. And, this guitar is going to be great for years and years. So, I think that you can see how, although looking at it big picture, the fret level and dress seems complicated. When you break it down step by step, it's really attainable with the right tools and the right method. Just taking it slow and steady, it's definitely within your capabilities to level and dress the frets on your guitar to a professional level.
That's Music Nomad quality, bringing fret care to the next level.